Robert, thank you so much for joining us here on the Mushroom Show.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about FungiQuest then. This is an event that took place between September 15th and October 15th of this year. Tell us a little bit about the history of that event and how it came to be.
Yeah, so FungiQuest is interesting. It started in Australia. There was essentially a little collaborative between BioQuest, which is kind of a data technology company that is trying to focus on kind of gathering environmental data. And they're based out of Australia. They teamed up with Fungi Map, which is also in Australia, to create FungiQuest in Australia. Essentially, the long and short of it is to send people out there and just kind of make observations, right, and add that data into the collection. It was good success over there. I saw it, figured, that's something that North America could really benefit from. And so I teamed up with the BioQuest people as well. And we brought it to North America to do it. So we didn't want to kind of discriminate against anyone and what platform they're using. So the BioQuest has essentially the software where they can go and pull the data from. We were using 6 different platforms. So iNaturalist and Mushroom Observer are 2 of the biggest ones in North America, but there's a handful of smaller ones. And in the end, we had basically just under 150,000 observations recorded by roughly 33,000 participants. And that captured just under, I believe it was 4,400 or just over 4,400 different species, which is roughly about a third, give or take, of the number of North American species that exist. So not too bad, because I mean, it wasn't morel season, so there weren't any morels taken.
Right.
So it is very time specific, right? If you uploaded an observation that you took in March or in April, it wouldn't count towards the total observations. It had to be a photo that was taken with a timestamp in that month. So yeah, right. 1/3 of pretty much all the species in North America were observed during that month.
148,000 sightings, 154,000 IDs. What's the difference between a sighting and an ID?
So when you go on these platforms, right, usually what happens is that someone will upload their observation, right, and they'll identify it, right. So they'll say, this is Pleurotus austriatus, this is an oyster mushroom, right. What then ends up happening is that other people go on these platforms and they will also identify it. So they might correct an identification or back you up on it. So that's the difference between the observation and the identification, which is why the identification will always be a higher number than the observation, simply because 9 times out of 10, someone will associate their observation with a species. So all the other observations that you see there, any difference between the observation number and the identification number is essentially a correction for an observation.
Awesome. That makes sense. And thanks for clarifying that. And I mean, one of the amazing things that stands out to me there is that 4,416 species. So that's roughly about a third of all species known to exist in North America. Considering it was in a 1-month period, I mean, that's amazing. Out of all of that, though, was there any surprising finds, like either stuff that was way out of season or stuff that we didn't know grew here? Or are you still parsing through the data?
We're still parsing through the data. There's a lot of it. There were some finds. We found, for example, a flame shield in Ontario, which is a rare species. So that person actually ended up winning a best find prize package. But, we're parsing through it, a lot of it. There was, because of the time that's chosen, for example, we're going to be doing another one in 2023, but at a different time of the year. And the reason why that's important is because the September 15th to October 15th that we chose was great for essentially the Northeast, but for the southern part of North America, as well as essentially the West Coast, it was a pretty bad season. So pretty much everyone in California and BC was telling us, there's no mushrooms, and everyone in Texas was telling us there's no mushrooms. No surprise that most of our data, if you were pull up the map of all 150,000, essentially, I'd say at least half are all from the Northeast of the North America. So that's just where the populations were at that time, right?
Yeah. And what would you say is kind of the main goal of this bioblitz or FungiQuest? I mean, one of the things that you've said before is there are so few trained mycologists, so little funding available to them. Is that the reason why you do this bioblitz? Is just a way to add to the body of knowledge of mushrooms, or what's the deal behind that?
Yeah, so there's kind of three main goals. One is just kind of spread information, right? I mean, the more activities that we have going on in our community, the more opportunity other people who are outside of the community can get pulled in, right? But really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is when you look at how the process works for identifying a threatened species, whether it be, bird, animal, plant, doesn't matter. The method in which to do that, you need essentially the data to show the population as well as that it's declining. And with fungi, that's pretty well impossible to do because the mushroom pops up and then the mushroom disappears. And maybe, in my region, I only get morels for about 2 weeks of the year, right? So it's pretty impossible for someone like me, even if I was a trained mycologist, to go out there and observe only the morels for the 2-week period and to have any sort of substantial data that would demonstrate any sort of diminishing population. And this is true for morels, but it's true for pretty much all the mushrooms. And this is only obviously for the fungi that actually even have the fruit bodies, right? We're not even talking about all the other ones that don't even have fruit bodies, but just these ones that have fruit bodies, it's basically impossible to demonstrate their numbers and that they're diminishing in order to label them as being threatened or endangered or anything like that. And really the only way to do that is to have these mass rallies where people go out and everyone observes, right? You do kind of a blanket observation and everyone goes out and they find as many of these different mushrooms as possible. Those numbers then get saved, and then you do this year on year, and then you can possibly show diminishing population. So it's tedious work, but it would be impossible to do as one person. So
yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? It's kind of like outsourcing a lot of that work. In reference to just hunting random mushrooms, you've mentioned on one of the articles I was reading that about 4 out of 5 mushrooms aren't toxic, and none of them in North America will harm you if you touch them. Which I guess if you look at it from the other side, it's saying, okay, 1 in 5 are toxic, which sounds like a lot. But if you're not eating them, there really is nothing to worry about, right? Were people concerned about that?
I mean, yeah, mycophobia is definitely a real thing. I always tell people it's overblown. You have a higher likelihood of, if you're randomly choosing something in a forest, you have a higher likelihood of dying from a berry than you do from a mushroom. So, why aren't people going out there and being all afraid of berries? My mother to this day, if I go and I pick chanterelles on our cottage property, I come back into the kitchen and my mother will be the first to tell me to not touch them because they'll kill me. So,
Yeah,
mycophobia is real for sure. And there is a mushroom that can, give you some sort of toxins by touch. So that is interesting. It's just not, in North America. So,
what is that mushroom? I don't know if I know too much about that.
It is called, if I remember correctly, fire coral or flame coral, something of that sort.
Okay.
And it's found along the Pacific coast. You got like Korea, Japan, New Guinea, a bit of Australia. It kind of runs around that coast there. But essentially, its toxin levels are so high that if you touch it, you can actually like start getting some toxins through your skin. It's basically the only mushroom that's recommended that you don't touch.
Right. There's always got to be one of them, right?
I don't think it's going to kill you if you touch it, but
Well, that's the
apparently
thing.
it'll make it.
I mean, mushrooms don't allow us to apply easy rules to whether or not you can eat them, whether or not they're poisonous, and now apparently whether or not you can touch them, because there's just one, right? There's one out there that's going to be annoying and not allow us to apply that rule across the entire kingdom.
They don't like to be categorized.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you mentioned also before, and this kind of ties back to something else we talked about, that we still don't really know that much about mushrooms in general. And I kind of agree, but like I wanted to get your opinion on like, what do you mean by that? The fact that we still don't know very much about mushrooms.
Well, I mean, only 5% of the of fungi are even scientifically documented. So, that right there is basically all you need to know.
Yeah.
I mean, you find me, any other field where only 5% of the given species are documented scientifically.
You were looking to make this the biggest fungi event in history. Do you think you accomplished that with the most recent event?
I definitely accomplished that. not to toot my own horn. No, you know, I admit that the parameters of this being a very kind of decentralized event helps. You know, I essentially reached out to mycological associations across the continent and asked them to, spread the word and get out there and participate. We removed as many barriers as possible. We even went so far as to not include a iNaturalist project because we didn't want to take away from other people's projects, right? If someone has the choice of contributing to ours or theirs, we didn't want to lose that observation. So we don't have an iNat project. We just gather all of them. But simple fact of the matter is that there aren't that many large fungi events, right? Again, most of the time we're siloed. If we were thinking about like if I thought off the top of my head, what's a large fungi event? It would probably be something along the lines of Telluride. It's an in-person event, so it's limited by the amount of hotel rooms there are, or how many people can fit in the town of Telluride. So as such, it's not going to really be able to compete, I guess, against a online event where there isn't really a cap. I was hoping for more people, to be fair. The observations, we only expected about 50,000 observations, so we blew that out of the water. I think by day 6, we had reached our goal, which was phenomenal. But I was hoping to have a little bit more than 33,000 participants, even though that is a good number. I didn't put any sort of goal on the number of people, but yeah.
I mean, that's a big number of people. Just picture like a couple football stadiums full of people, and that's probably about 33,000. So, congratulations on a hyper successful event. I'm super excited to see where this is going. What is next? You mentioned you want to do it again at a different time of year, but like, what's next for the quest?
Yeah. So next year, so this year was primarily focused on kind of getting out the word and getting anyone involved. Obviously, we're going to keep that up for next year. We're going to do a different time of year, we said. But what I would really like to bring in is DNA sequencing. We didn't include that in 2022 because the messaging around that, we didn't want the average person to get confused or think that they couldn't participate if they had no idea about DNA sequencing, which I would say the vast majority don't, right? So, but at the end of the day, one of the issues that we face in terms of mushroom identification and observations is that a lot of mushrooms look like other mushrooms, right? And the observations that we're making, as much as they're great, they often just kind of narrow down to a observation instead of specifically being that species, right? You might take a photo. Sometimes some of these, photos are just one photo, right? It's the top of a cap and it's like, yeah, it's this mushroom. And really, based on that photo, it could be any of 12, right?
Yeah.
So to incorporate this other segment of DNA sequencing so that we can start building up the database on all of these DNA sequences and kind of do the push, kind of like the observations that we're doing right now, which is photo-based, it's already being done, right? People are already doing DNA sequencing. We're not reinventing the wheel here. What we're doing is kind of giving an event a push, a reason to kind of get out there and do as much as you possibly can in 1 month period, and hopefully win some prizes along the way and just kind of, spread the word in that. So that's really what we're trying to incorporate this. So DNA sequencing, I'm hoping, will be a fun new addition to next year.
Oh, totally. That sounds awesome. I totally get what you mean, right? Like, yeah, there's so many mushrooms that are impossible to identify from a single picture. And that's why I always kind of cringe a little bit at those apps that you just kind of point at a mushroom and it like tells you what it is. It's like, well, you don't know where you are or what time of year it is, or, it could be anything, is this,
yeah.
So who knows? So I think that's really, really cool to add that. And I think that will do a lot. That was super interesting. Thanks so much for sharing everything you're doing over at ThinkFungi and with the bioblitz. Thanks so much for joining us on the Mushroom Show today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.